teach us to pray, Jesus gave us what is known as the Lord's Prayer. Out of Luke chapter 11, one of the disciples said, Lord, teach us to pray. And I told you before, it's Lord, teach us to pray like you. They saw something different in the way he prayed. And in response, he gave us the Lord's Prayer. A prayer that is not meant to be just mindlessly recited, but to be reflected upon. And that is what we're doing this summer. Just phrase by phrase, we've been slowly working through the Lord's Prayer. This then is how you should pray. Jesus said, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Jesus teaches us to approach God as Abba, as Papa, Dada. This is review. We come to God as a child to a loving and trusted Father. And I said last week that we tend to approach prayer as this transactional matter rather than a relational matter. And by that I meant we treat prayer as if we're pulling up to a drive-through window and we say, God, here's what I want from you and here's what I need and let me place my order and just have that ready as I pull around to the pickup window. And we need to focus on the relational context. This is how you should pray. Realize you're coming to Abba, your daddy. That's incredible. Reflecting on the Lord's Prayer changes our approach to prayer. It clarifies, it prioritizes, it changes our perspective. We pray, your name be hallowed. May your name be treated as holy and revered and respected in my life and then in this world, a world that profanes your name, treats your name as common. Hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Not my kingdom, not my self-interest, but your kingdom. We talked last week about kingdoms in conflict. There is the kingdom of light, there is the dominion of darkness, there's the kingdom of the Son, the kingdom of Satan, and there's this spiritual battle for the hearts and souls of people taking place right now. The kingdom of the Son expands as people come to a knowledge of the Savior. That's what we're praying for when we say, your kingdom come. May your kingdom be advanced. Kingdom is here right now, but it's a kingdom in conflict with two kingdoms. And then this phrase we come to this morning, your will be done. Your name, your kingdom, and your will be done. I began this series, we just talked about sort of the honesty around prayer. This is such a frustrating discipline. Easily we can just grow to be sort of disillusioned with prayer. And one factor that contributes to that is this topic right here. Prayer and the will of God. This is what I mean by that. This really is frustrating when we try to think and understand it. John writes this. This is the confidence we have in approaching God. That if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have what we ask of him. Ask and he hears. Ask and you shall receive. But there's this one little caveat. This one stipulation, one disclaimer. Only if you ask according to his will. And one of the primary reasons we struggle with the practice of prayer is the dilemma of unanswered prayer. We have this heartfelt prayer. The motivation seems so good, and yet silence from heaven and unanswered prayer just cripples our desire to pray. It leaves us confused. It leaves us doubting, questioning our faith in God. If a prayer is unanswered, are we supposed to conclude that it wasn't according to his will? Okay, so it just gets really, really confusing. I'm going to modify an outline from a good book on prayer. It's entitled Too Busy Not to Pray. It's written by Bill Hybels. Bill admits he borrowed this from someone else, so I'm borrowing it from Bill, who borrowed it from someone else. Who knows where it came from? I've worked through this with you before, but I think we need to be reminded, as we're just honest about this struggle that we have, this frustration we have with unanswered prayer. And so we're going to look at the request for prayer and then the response. And we work through this, and eventually we kind of loop back around and we deal with this phrase of according to your will, or your will be done. What does that mean? So in the first category of unanswered prayer, sometimes we pray, but the request may be wrong. And in those times, God may be saying no to our request. Actually, the Bible has quite a bit to say about this subject. It's full of stories about people who asked for something and didn't receive what they asked for. In fact, in the Bible, you will probably find twice as many stories about unanswered prayer as you do answered prayer. For example, one day, James and John vainly decide they want to secure their heavenly seating assignments, and so they have their mother come and kneel before Jesus, and she asks, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine sit at your right hand and one at your left hand when you come into your kingdom." That's her prayer request. And Jesus responds, that's a no. Okay, that's a no. Getting your mommy to do self-promotion for you is not exactly how the kingdom of heaven works. But see, here's the deal. It's fundamental to the character of God that he always reserves the right to say no. A loving parent does that for the protection, for the best for their child. And prayer is just talking to a wise and good father, and sometimes our request is wrong, and God will say no. I just found this little cartoon, not particularly funny, but God never seems to answer my prayers. Maybe he installed a spam filter. Yeah, because sometimes it's just self-serving, self-centered, and it's just wrong. And a loving father says to the child, no. And we all know Garth Brooks' song, some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayer. Sometimes our request is wrong, and the response is no. Sometimes our request may not be wrong in itself, but it may be a timing issue. Sometimes the timing is wrong, and so God says slow, meaning not yet. Sometimes no, sometimes slow, not yet. This is not a no. And again, the Bible is full of examples where God's response to his people is not yet. Abraham waited for years and years, decades, before he finally received the son that he longed for, that he prayed for, that God had even promised to him. And that wait must have felt like a no to Abraham, but in God's timetable it was simply a not yet. And so sometimes the request might be right, but the timing is not. And we hate to wait, don't we? But one of the character traits we try to pass on to our children is patience, the ability to tolerate delayed gratification. We can't build that trait into a child if we satisfy every one of their whims instantly. And of course, the parallel is we have a loving father who responds the same way to his children. So sometimes the timing is wrong and God says, slow, not yet. Already sort of touching on the next reason, and I think this is one of the primary reasons that prayer seems to go unanswered, at least in the way that we wanted answers. Because sometimes there's something in us, and God will respond, now I want you to grow. And I want you to struggle, and I want you to wrestle with this so that you can grow. Here's the classic text. This is the text I want everyone to be able to handle rightly. Therefore, Paul writes, and he's been relating how he has been the recipient of surpassing great revelation from God. So therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh. We don't know what the thorn was. We assume some painful, sort of disabling physical malady, but we don't know. And I believe God intentionally kept it vague so that we're going to apply the verse to ourselves. I was given a thorn in the flesh. What that thorn was isn't important. It's the why it was given. In order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me. Note, next verse. 3 times, meaning 3 seasons of time. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord, take it away from me. That was Paul's request. Lord, take this from me. No answer. Lord, take this from me. A second season of prayer. Still, heaven is silent. Lord, take this from me. Imagine if one of the TV Wealth, Health, and Prosperity Gospel preachers said to Paul at this point, well, Paul, you just don't have enough faith. Just name it and claim your healing, Paul. You know what? There must be some unconfessed sin in your life. That is why God is not answering. And that's the kind of spiritual abuse people live under with that sort of teaching. Okay, during this 3rd season of prayer, Lord, take this from me. Verse 9, and God said to me, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. My answer to your request feels like a no, but actually what I'm saying is I want you to grow. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Paul concludes, therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me, for when I am weak, that's when I'm strong. God's response to Paul's request was, no, Paul, I want you to grow in your dependence upon me. I'm removing that prideful self-sufficiency. I'm instilling humility. Paul was an incredibly, I think, intellectual and wise person. And, people like us, we have struggled with humility. So I'm teaching you about that was supposed to be fun. I'm teaching you about my enabling power. Martin Luther said this: God cannot fill you up with his grace if you're already full of yourself. First, he must empty your cup of pride before he can fill you up. If we never faced pain, adversity in our life, if we were always in control, we would be tempted to think, what do I need God for? And we would never display the life of dependency that God desires for us. And so sometimes the request is wrong for us, God says no. Sometimes the timing is off and God says, slow, not yet. Sometimes there's something in us that displeases God, and he's more interested in our character than in our comfort. And God is going to say, grow. That is my will for your life. Okay, now I put a summary statement on the screen. If you want my teaching notes, give me your email. I'll send you my manuscript. You'll have this statement because I tell you right here, foundational to the Christian life. Prayer is not designed to conform God to our will, but us to his. His will for our lives is that we are transformed and that we mature in Christ-like character. There it is. What's God's will for our life? That we be made more and more like his Son in our character. That we are transformed into Christ-likeness. God is more interested in your character than in your comfort. so important to understand that. Why, God? Why don't you take this thorn from me, this painful malady? Well, maybe in his timing he will, but he is always more interested in our character than in our comfort. So we need to understand, your will be done, that phrase in the Lord's Prayer, with that statement right there in mind. That understanding will lead us away from plea bargain praying to the prayer of relinquishment. And I'm going to explain what both of those are. Plea bargain prayers. They sound something like this. And they're usually spoken when we're in that sort of desperate situation and we want out. God, if you will do X for me, then I will do Y for you. Y being any number of things like, well, I'm going to attend church more often, God. I will stop drinking, God. And the list goes on and on. So we beg and we plead, we bargain. We try to manipulate God with our promises in order that we can get him to comply with our request or our will. This is about our will or God's will. Your will be done is the prayer request. But we plea bargain because we really want our will. The other prayer is the prayer of relinquishment. And devotional writer Catherine Marshall, a number of years ago, described her journey in coming to know the prayer of relinquishment. She writes, I had been ill for 6 months with a lung infection, and a bevy of specialists seemed unable to help. Persistent prayer, using all the faith I could muster, had resulted in nothing. I was still in bed full time. One afternoon, I read the story of a missionary who had been an invalid for 8 years. Constantly, she had prayed that God would make her well so that she might do his work. Finally, worn out with futile petitions, she prayed, all right, I give up. If you want me to be an invalid, that's your business. Anyway, I want you even more than I want my health. You decide. Within 2 weeks, the missionary was completely healed and out of bed. Catherine Marshall could not forget the story. She came to that same point of acceptance, to that point of relinquishment. She prayed, I'm beaten, finished. God, decide what you want from me for the rest of my life. Your will be done, is what she was saying. And from that moment, her recovery began. God was trying to teach me something important about prayer, she writes. A demanding spirit with self-will as its rudder blocks prayer. That's good. A demanding spirit with self-will as its rudder blocks prayer. I understood that the reason for this is that God absolutely refuses to violate our free will. That therefore, unless self-will is voluntarily given up, even God cannot move to answer prayer. That's the way he designed the universe. He's given us free will. And we choose. Is it my will or is it your will be done? The prayer of relinquishment is really about letting go and letting God. Okay? I've never really liked that phrase. I like it more now in this context. It typically really frustrates me when I hear people use that phrase. Well, I let go and let God. And I want to challenge them. You let go of what? But in the context of the Lord's Prayer, it is letting go of your self-will. Letting go of your faulty beliefs that somehow, I'm in control. So letting go of plea bargaining sort of praying. And this is an ongoing process. It's a process of relinquishment. Not my will, but your will be done. Greatest example of this, it's Jesus' prayer in the garden. Jesus could have avoided the cross. You ever think about that? He could have compromised with the priest. He could have bargained with Caiaphas. Pilate wanted to release him. He all but begged him just to say the right thing so that he might release him. In the garden, Jesus would have had plenty of time to flee. But he used his free will to leave that decision up to the Father. Powerful verse. Father, Abba, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Cup meaning death, meaning taking the sins of the world upon himself on the cross. Take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. Relinquishment means to release, to let go, to voluntarily give up our self-will and let God take over. Why doesn't God answer our prayers or some prayers? Sometimes we ask for really good things and it's not answered. We can't explain why. So it's actually sort of spiritually abusive to try to give people an answer why. Maybe it's a child diagnosed with a life-threatening, debilitating sort of disease, and the parents just pray for healing. Why is heaven silent on the one request that is so important to them? And I can't point to an explanation that is satisfying as to why that prayer wasn't answered. But we can point to Jesus and the cross. And I can tell you that at the heart of the good news is an unanswered prayer in the garden. Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, yours be done. That's the most desperate prayer ever prayed, from the most discerning spirit that ever lived, from the purest heart that ever beat. A prayer for deliverance from the most unjust suffering that was ever known. And all he got was silence. The cup was not taken away. The request from the human perspective of Jesus at that time was denied. And you think, what if God had said yes? What if Jesus had been spared from that? What if there had been no cross, no death, no tomb, no resurrection, no forgiveness of sin, no birth of the church, no coming of the Spirit? From the sort of unwanted, unmerited suffering of Jesus comes the hope of the world that remade history, because the ultimate answer to every human anguish leads us back to our need for the cross where God died for our sin. So we don't know why some prayers get yeses and some get no's. We know the anguish of a no when we desperately, desperately want a yes, but we don't know why. And so we cling to the fact that in the cross, God's no for Jesus became a yes for the rest of humanity. And we cling to that as we live by faith and not by sight. Faith in the goodness and the love of Abba, who is so gracious to us even when we are so undeserving. And so when we pray, your will be done, just pause. That is actually so deep. Your name, your kingdom, your will, Father. The first part of the Lord's Prayer just radically changes the lens, the perspective through which we see life. It clarifies, it prioritizes, and then it sets us free. It really does. Jeff, I want you to come back up now. And I want you to pray with me. I'm going to lead you through sort of a time here. We reflect on everything that's been said. And I want you to understand this morning that God invites you, whatever the ache is, whatever word, wherever there's a no that you just so desperately want a yes. God invites you to continue to bring it to Him. a dream, a disappointment, a problem perhaps with your health or the health of someone you love, the stress of a financial burden, somebody that's a long way from God and you just want them so desperately to come to know Jesus as a Savior. God invites you to bring it to Him and to say, you know what, I'm tired of carrying the burden. Your will be done. Your will be done. I want you to stay in that sort of prayerful state. Jennifer's going to sing this song. Just keep your eyes closed. Just a moment, Jennifer. It may be helpful. I want you to pray with your palms open again, symbolizing that you're giving it to God. You're not clinging on to this any longer. And the lyrics of the chorus read, God will make a way when there seems to be no way. He works in ways we cannot see. He will make a way for me. What a wonderful expression of faith, because we live by faith, not by sight. And when there seems to be no way, God is able. Will prayer change anything? I don't know if it will change your circumstances, but I know that it will change you. When you begin to pray, Abba, your will be done. When you begin to release this self-will, your will, your way, and say, Father, your will be done. And I can trust you in that because you're the loving Father, and I'm your child. When you begin to pray that way, you will change. He will be my guide, hold me closely to his side, the song lyrics say, and I love that because there's that relational context. Even in the darkest valley, he will be by your side. With love and strength for each new day, he will make a way. So Father, give us your grace this morning to stop fretting over outcomes that we cannot see and to release it, to relinquish it to